Well, my question to the panel is this. If broadcast media, any media outlet, if they're going to go for gotcha journalism, they create an area of a lack of trust, and in which case the only information we may expect is carefully sanitized, drafted press releases. And if that's the case, what happens to democracy?
Richard Holden, have you ever been in this position?
Well, I mean, given you've probably recorded all of the ad breaks you've done before now, Ian, I'm really worried. I think, look, if there's a live camera there, it does a bit go with the territory if you are a politician. I think you've got to be a bit careful of that. I mean, sometimes in my constituency surgeries, actually the way that, you respond to people on a one-on-one basis and the way that they would speak to you, and sometimes that would be more blunt than you want broadcast. But I think that's a slightly different scenario than when you're doing national broadcast TV. But I think it goes to the territory. She has apologised for, and I think it is for the swearing element of it, which I think is fair enough.
Given that Number 10 were fully behind Lee Anderson when he used a similar word in an on-the-record interview a few weeks ago, they lost no time in throwing her under the bus today. Why would they do that?
No, I think the Education Secretary decided that she didn't want those words to be what was leading the bulletins as much as they have been. So she's wanted to go out and clarify that, and it's not the way that Gillian would normally address an audience. The way that Lee might address an audience is quite different, and I think it does reflect the sort of politician that they are as to how they'd like to present themselves, which I think is fair enough as well.
Was she right to apologise?
Yeah, I mean, she has done it. It's her choice. I don't really want to start casting.
Because Number 10 said she was wrong before she apologised. I mean, that's where there's an inconsistency there.
No, I understand that. I think the key thing here was that they want she, as the Education Secretary, quite rightly wants the focus to be on what they're doing now. She doesn't want to be on the words she used. She wants to be on the fact that the government are trying to get a grip of this situation, which has really emerged since the surveys started going out in March, and she wants to show that progress, and that's what she wants to be the focus of what she's talking about today.
Steve Reed.
Well, I mean, it may not appear like it, but we do get some modicum of training to do this job sometimes. And one of the things they tell you when you get a job where you're going to be... and not very much, and I'm sure it comes across, but one of the things they say to you is, look, when the mic's on, be careful what you say because it might get broadcast. So, you're aware of what might happen. And for my part, I think a little bit of colourful language sometimes can humanise a politician. We can come across as a bit like automatons sometimes if we're just doing the lines. So I don't think that is the problem. I think the issue here isn't how she said what she said. It was the attitude underneath it, which was a bit arrogant, I thought. Why are people not giving me credit when actually she's presiding over a pretty terrible fiasco where kids are being unable to go to school with just a few days' notice because the government, of which she is a part, had failed to act on multiple warnings about this.
But her point was that the government couldn't act if the head teachers and the local education authorities or the academies hadn't sent back the information which they were asked to provide some time ago.
Do you know what? I'd like to think if we were in government, we might be a little bit more proactive than just emailing out a form and then sitting back and thinking, job done.
They had been chased.
Which is what they've done. What you would do is, there's an issue with the structure of school buildings. You would get a proper condition survey done. You wouldn't just email out a form, and then you would collate it.
That's not the responsibility of government. That's the responsibility of each individual school or local education.
The DfE has a responsibility to oversee the safety of all of our schools. In fact, one of the reasons we're calling for an audit of all public sector buildings is because we need to know the scale of the problem with general maintenance, particularly this kind of. Well, that's what the government's responsible for, so that you can see the scale of the problem, so you can see the kind of investment that might be needed to tackle it. You can't just have a government that is hands off and then stands back when there's a problem and says, "Not my fault, Gov." Particularly when it was this government that cancelled the planned maintenance programme, Building Schools for the Future, that would have meant that this kind of concrete had been taken out years ago.
Yeah, well, I think she chose the wrong target for her frustration. I mean, I think rather than taking her frustration out on school leaders and local authority leaders, she should be taking her frustration out on our cabinet colleagues, on the Chancellor and the Prime Minister. In particular, as Steve said, this is a government that oversaw the cancellation of the Building for Schools for the Future programme. Rishi Sunak in 2020-2021 cut in half the programme available to support the rebuilding and repair of schools. Now, I mean, I think it's interesting. Richard says there's a double standard almost for the deputy leader of the Conservative Party can F and J Jeff, the education secretary, can't. But for me, actually, the real issue is who's dealing with this crisis in our schools that are literally crumbling down around our kids and our teachers. That's the real issue, I think. Over the past 10 years, the DFE were very clear that they needed funding to repair or replace 300 schools, not 50 schools. So I think the Prime Minister, he does have to take responsibility. And I think, Ian, I would just say this, I think this is partly, it reflects a Prime Minister and a Cabinet that doesn't see the day-to-day decline of our public services because they don't use those public services themselves. Rishi Sunak does not send his kids to state schools.
Well, he doesn't
use our NHS. He doesn't use our railways. He flies by helicopter. So anybody who goes into any of our schools...
He did use the train the other day and had to get off because it was 2 hours late.
Well, that's the privatised, fragmented railway system for you. There's a serious point here that you can't think of any aspect of our public realm or public services that has got better.
That is a fair accusation, Richard Holden, isn't it?
No, I actually just, I get why Paul and Steve are saying what they're saying, but, I mean, you just need to actually look at what the government's done on this programme around schools. There's big surveys went out in March this year. 90% of schools have got back, tens of thousands of them across the country. But what didn't happen was that happened in Wales, where Labour have been in government for 25 years. Now, if you want, it's fair enough to throw criticism around if you want to on that basis, but in answer to that, Labour have been in government in Wales. Why didn't they even
That's such a nonsense, because in Wales they didn't cancel building schools for the future.
No, but
you did it in England. So they've had planned maintenance for 13 years.
So
it's
is that
scrapped.
No, but is that...
That's why the problem's happening here.
There's two issues here. You are aware that 2 schools in Wales have closed today, aren't you?
But the problem is much worse here because the UK got a Nick Gibb, who's still an education minister.
You don't even know it's. You don't even know it's
schools for the future.
You can't say that, Steve, because
schools for the future.
Well, I'll come on to building schools.
And didn't replace it with anything else.
No, that's not true. I'll come on to building schools for the future in a second. But you can't say it's worse in England because we have no idea how bad it is in Wales.
We
have absolutely no idea because the Welsh Labour government have been in power for almost 25 years. They've not even started to look at this in the Welsh school sector at all.
I know from running a council and the condition of council housing.
So how many are in Wales then?
Like if you carry out planned maintenance,
one at a time, because people can't hear
if you carry out planned maintenance over an extended period of time, it costs you far less than waiting for a crisis to happen and then having to intervene. So you're wasting public money as well as putting people's lives in danger. And it shouldn't be accepted. And you knew it was going on. A school collapsed in Kent in 2018.
You can't even say what Labour are doing in Wales at the moment. 2 schools, literally after the schools have opened, have been closed. At least the government in England has been ahead of the game.
Do you think the government should publish?
Okay, let's move on.